Thornfield Hayes, heir to an empire of real estate and luxury investments. Her emerald necklace blazed like captured lightning, and the careful architecture of her face was fixed into the kind of smile that people had learned to obey. Where she stood, conversation slowed. Where she gestured, doors opened. She was not used to being challenged. Not here, not anywhere. At precisely 9 o'clock, the double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A woman entered, dressed plainly in black slacks and a crisp hotel blouse, carrying a tray of fresh champagne. She was small, slight, her hair pulled back in a bun that had come a little loose from long hours of work. No one paid her attention, not until she made the mistake of walking past Victoria Thornfield Hayes. Victoria's eyes narrowed, green fire cutting through the air. She set down her champagne flute with exaggerated care, then tilted her chin in disdain. "You don't belong here, sweetheart," she said, her voice slicing through the gentle hum of string instruments. "The service entrance is around back." The words landed with a cruel finality. Conversations froze. Crystal glasses hovered in midair. The orchestra faltered for a fraction of a second, then recovered, the violins trembling as though they too were afraid. The waitress stopped. Her face tightened, but she didn't speak. The humiliation was a living thing, crawling over her skin as every set of eyes in the ballroom burned into her. She looked down at the tray in her hands, as though focusing on the delicate stems of the flutes could anchor her in place. Laughter rippled softly across the marble. Hesitant at first, then gathering courage as people took their cue from Victoria. This was how the hierarchy worked. The Thornfields humiliated, the room approved, and the target melted into invisibility. But this time, something strange happened. The waitress set her tray down, carefully, deliberately, on the nearest table. Her hands no longer shook. She straightened her spine. When she lifted her face, her eyes held a quiet fire, the kind that did not flicker in the presence of diamonds and titles. And then she spoke, in flawless, perfect Mandarin. The ballroom glittered like a jewel box, each chandelier dripping light onto marble floors polished to a liquid sheen. Waiters in crisp white gloves drifted like shadows, balancing silver trays stacked with crystal flutes. The guests of the Thornfield Foundation's annual Autumn Gala were a study in curated perfection. Gowns sewn in Paris, tuxedos tailored in Milan, every smile sharpened to match the precision of their wealth. At the heart of it all stood Victoria. The sound was so unexpected, so crystalline in its accuracy, that the entire ballroom went still. The words tumbled like poetry, rich in tone, the cadence effortless. Every syllable cut clean through the heavy silence. It was not broken Mandarin, not the clumsy attempt of a tourist. It was the kind of Mandarin you heard from diplomats, from scholars, from people born to its music. At the far end of the ballroom, near the head table, a man startled so violently that his champagne spilled. Jiang Wei, Chinese billionaire and guest of honor, turned, his face alight with recognition. He had spent much of the evening frowning at Victoria's shallow attempts to impress him with rehearsed phrases and awkward bows. But now his eyes locked onto the waitress as though he had just discovered gold where everyone else saw dust. The waitress bowed slightly, continuing in Mandarin, her voice calm and steady. She spoke to Jiang Wei directly, acknowledging his presence, thanking him for attending, and with delicate precision, apologizing for the rudeness he had endured in this ballroom tonight. Jiang Wei rose to his feet. His chair scraped back against marble. Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one ever stood during Victoria Thornfield Hayes' gala unless invited to do so. Yet here he was, a man whose fortune dwarfed even the Thornfield legacy, walking across the floor to the woman Victoria had just dismissed as service. "Ni de Zhongwen Hen Piao Liang," Jiang Wei said warmly, his Mandarin resonant, approving. "Your Chinese is beautiful." His smile widened, genuine, a rare thing in this carefully rehearsed world. "And your pronunciation, flawless." The waitress smiled faintly, bowing again. "Jixinin," she replied, respectful. "Thank you, sir." The room buzzed, confusion sparking like static. The orchestra stopped playing altogether. Victoria's face drained of color, the emeralds at her throat suddenly looking garish, excessive, almost mocking. This is absurd," she stammered, turning to her nearest circle of donors, who were already leaning forward with hungry eyes. "She's staff. She doesn't know—" Her words tripped over themselves, collapsing into fragments. For the first time in her life, her authority cracked, but the billionaire was not listening to her. He was speaking rapidly now with the waitress, switching fluidly between Mandarin and English, asking questions, her name, her background, her connection to languages. Each answer she gave impressed him more. She spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had studied, who had lived, who had earned every word. By the time Victoria tried to reassert herself, it was too late. The room had shifted. Power, once centered on her like a crown, had slipped silently across the marble floor and gathered around the young woman in the hotel uniform. The humiliation was complete. But not for the waitress, for Victoria Thornfield Hayes. That's the hook and the spark, the racist dismissal. The perfect Mandarin twist and the room turning. A grand, opulent ballroom glowing under crystal chandeliers, marble floors polished like glass, waiters in crisp white gloves moving silently with trays of champagne. At the center, a wealthy socialite woman in an emerald necklace and couture gown stands tall with a cruel smile, her hand raised dismissively. Before her, a humble hotel waitress in plain black slacks and a crisp blouse clutches a tray of glasses, head slightly bowed under the sting of humiliation. Guests in tuxedos and glittering gowns pause mid-conversation, frozen, their eyes on the confrontation. The atmosphere is tense, elegant, and cruel, luxury and arrogance against quiet dignity. The gala did not resume the way it was supposed to. After the waitress had spoken flawless Mandarin and Jiang Wei had risen to his feet, the Thornfield ballroom seemed to wobble on its marble foundations. The orchestra, uncertain, tried to continue, but their notes floated strangely brittle, shattering under the pressure of the silence. Waiters no longer glided unnoticed. Every guest was alert, watching, whispering, pulling out phones they had been explicitly instructed to keep tucked away. Victoria Thornfield Hayes, who had always thrived in the spotlight, found herself drowning in it. She laughed too loudly at a donor's nervous joke, the sound brittle as glass. Her emerald necklace, usually admired, felt suddenly garish, as though it screamed of excess instead of refinement. She kept darting glances toward the cluster forming around Jiang Wei and the waitress. A cluster that grew denser by the second. The waitress, her name, whispered from a staff member, was Elena Liu, did not appear cowed. She had slipped effortlessly into the role of interpreter. Standing beside Jiang Wei with quiet poise, her hotel uniform suddenly transformed into something resembling armor. Victoria's fingers dug into her champagne glass, knuckles whitening. This was supposed to be her night. Jiang Wei was supposed to leave this ballroom dazzled by the Thornfield Foundation, ready to funnel millions into her urban renewal projects, the ones dressed up in philanthropic language but designed to multiply her real estate fortune. Instead, he was laughing warmly with a hotel staffer. A staffer! Unbelievable, Victoria muttered under her breath. She spotted her husband, Charles, hovering near the board members. His face, usually placid, was flushed with unease. "Handle this," she hissed as she stalked toward him, the hem of her gown sweeping like a blade across the floor. "This is spiraling." Charles cleared his throat, already sweating. He seems rather taken with her, Vic. Maybe we should... Should what? Her voice was razor thin. Allow a maid to hijack my gala? Allow her to make me look like the villain? Charles flinched. Better a few minutes of embarrassment than offending a man with Jiang Wei's influence. Victoria turned on him, fury burning her eyes emerald to match her necklace. "Do you think I got here by bowing to humiliation?" She smoothed her gown and inhaled sharply. "No, I control this room. I always control this room." But even as she said it, the room was already slipping away. At the edges of the ballroom, clusters of guests whispered behind raised champagne flutes. Words like arrogant, out of touch, and embarrassing floated between them. For years, many had privately rolled their eyes at Victoria's cruelty, but they had never seen it punctured so publicly. "She actually told her to use the service entrance," one woman murmured, eyes gleaming with scandal. "In front of Jiang Wei, no less. And the girl's Mandarin," another whispered back. "Impeccable. I studied in Beijing 3 years and I could barely follow her." Did you see Zhang Wei's face? That's respect, phones buzzed discreetly under tables. A few guests dared to type hurried messages, crafting the first drafts of rumors that would leak into Manhattan's elite circles before dawn. Meanwhile, Zhang Wei was in no rush to release Elena from conversation. He peppered her with questions, not in English but in Mandarin, his eyes alight with genuine curiosity. You studied where? He asked, leaning in. Beijing University, Elena replied smoothly. I majored in linguistics, focusing on tonal languages. Later, I worked briefly in cultural liaison before moving here. And yet you are here, serving champagne? Zhang Wei's brows lifted, not with scorn, but with something closer to indignation on her behalf. Elena hesitated. Her eyes flickered toward Victoria's furious figure in the distance. Life doesn't always offer doors that open the way you expect, she said carefully. Sometimes you take the job that pays the rent, even if you know you can offer more. Zhang Wei chuckled, though there was no humor in it. A shame for them, he said, gesturing toward the Thornfields. And a blessing for me tonight. Finally, someone worth speaking with. Victoria could not bear it any longer. She swept across the marble, smile fixed in place, eyes hard as cut glass. Mr. Zhang, she purred, interrupting. So delighted you're enjoying yourself. Elena here is one of our dedicated staff. We encourage them to feel part of the family, you know. Her voice dripped with condescension. Elena's jaw tightened, but she remained silent, bowing her head respectfully. Zhang Wei's expression cooled. Family? Is that how you speak to family? His Mandarin carried sharpness even through the translator's echo. Victoria blinked. Excuse me? I witnessed the way you dismissed her, Zhang Wei said, switching to English so the surrounding guests could hear. His voice was calm but deliberate. The words you used were not for family. They were for servants. A murmur rippled through the crowd, scandal blossoming like wildfire. Victoria's smile faltered, then recovered with brittle brightness. A misunderstanding. English expressions can sometimes sound harsher than intended. You must understand. No misunderstanding, Zhang Wei cut in. His gaze swept the room, taking in the watchful faces. Respect is universal, Elena's heart pounded. For the first time in years, someone with real power was standing against the machine that had kept her invisible. By now, the Thornfield board members were uneasy, shifting in their chairs. Donors glanced nervously at one another. The hierarchy that had always felt untouchable, Victoria at the pinnacle, everyone else orbiting, was unraveling thread by thread. It wasn't only Zhang Wei's words. It was the look in his eyes, the way he centered Elena rather than Victoria. That single gesture threatened to invert the pyramid of power that held this ballroom together. Victoria, sensing the danger, leaned closer to Elena, her smile never breaking. Why don't you run along now, dear? She whispered through clenched teeth. You've caused quite enough trouble tonight. But Elena no longer bowed. Her voice steady and soft carried. With respect, ma'am, I only spoke to ease Mr. Zhang's discomfort. If that is trouble, then perhaps trouble was overdue. Gasps fluttered across the marble. Victoria froze, her nails biting into her clutch. Charles finally intervened, tugging Victoria's arm gently but firmly. Enough, he muttered. You'll bury us. She yanked her arm free but didn't argue. For the first time in her adult life, she felt something foreign coil in her stomach. Not anger, not annoyance, fear, across the room. Zhang Wei clapped Elena on the shoulder warmly, speaking once more in Mandarin. His words were simple but devastating. Sometimes, he said, it takes the smallest voice to reveal the biggest truth. Every guest heard it. Every guest understood. The orchestra, desperate to salvage the evening, struck up a waltz. Couples drifted awkwardly onto the floor, trying to pretend the air wasn't heavy with scandal. But nothing could erase what had just happened. Victoria's humiliation was no longer private. It had become communal, and it was spreading. Hours later, when the gala finally wound down, Victoria sat rigid in her limousine, emerald necklace biting into her throat. Charles sat across from her, nursing a silent glass of scotch. You made a scene, he said finally. I. Victoria snapped. I made a scene? That girl humiliated me in front of Zhang Wei, in front of everyone. She didn't humiliate you, Charles interrupted quietly. You humiliated yourself. The words landed heavier than any champagne glass hurled against marble. For the first time, Victoria Thornfield Hayes had no retort. The night had ended. But the whispers had not. By dawn, they would ripple through Manhattan's boardrooms, carried in text messages and hushed phone calls. And somewhere among those whispers, a seed was already sprouting. A seed that would grow into the undoing of Victoria Thornfield Hayes. Morning broke over Manhattan with the kind of pale, metallic light that made the skyline look like it was forged from steel. In the Thornfield penthouse, however, the dawn brought no warmth. Victoria Thornfield Hayes hadn't slept. She sat at her vanity, emerald necklace tossed carelessly on the counter beside her, mascara smudged under her eyes. Her phone had buzzed relentlessly through the night, every vibration another crack in the wall she had tried to build around her reputation. The gala incident had not stayed in the ballroom. It never would. The first leak appeared before midnight, a grainy video recorded discreetly from someone's phone. In it, her voice cut sharp and cold. You don't belong here, sweetheart. The service entrance is around back. The clip spread like wildfire. By morning, it had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times across private WhatsApp groups, elite gossip channels, and even a handful of public forums that delighted in the downfall of the powerful. Hashtags were already forming, brutal in their simplicity. Service entrance, emerald cruelty. Victoria tried to tell herself it would blow over. Scandals always did. Money could buy silence, spin, erasure, but as she scrolled through her feed, her manicured fingers trembled. This wasn't just scandal. This was exposure. At 11 a.m., the first statement came, not from Victoria, but from the Grand Metropolitan Hotel Staff Union. We condemn the treatment of our colleague, Elena Liu, at last night's Thornfield Foundation Gala. No worker should face public humiliation for doing their job. We stand with Elena. It was signed by dozens of staff, from waiters to cleaning crews, their names bold and defiant. By noon, more testimonies poured in. Anonymous servers shared stories of years of mistreatment at Thornfield events, being ordered to keep their eyes down, being docked pay for imagined mistakes, being berated if they spoke above a whisper. The image of Victoria Thornfield Hayes as a glamorous philanthropist began to curdle into something far uglier. A tyrant in emeralds, a queen ruling through cruelty, the New York Chronicle. Always eager for scandal among the elite. Ran the headline by mid-afternoon. Emerald heiress or emerald tyrant? Thornfield matriarch under fire after gala incident. The article dissected her words at the gala, quoted anonymous donors who admitted they felt uncomfortable, and even embedded the viral clip. Crucially, it included a sidebar about Elena Liu, her academic background, her degree from Beijing University, her work in linguistics. The contrast was devastating. One woman cloaked in wealth and cruelty, another woman with quiet brilliance forced to serve drinks to pay rent. The narrative wrote itself, and it spread faster than Victoria could control. In the boardroom of Thornfield Tower, panic was setting in. The executives, all men in sharp suits, shifted uncomfortably around the long oak table as Victoria entered. She had chosen a power suit this time, emerald brooch pinned sharply at her collar, her posture defiant. Let's not overreact, she snapped, slamming her clutch onto the table. This is nothing. A 30-second clip taken out of context. Context doesn't matter, muttered one director, not meeting her eyes. It's perception. And right now, the perception is poison. Poison? Victoria scoffed. Please. By next week, they'll be chasing some other scandal. We'll release a statement. A misunderstanding, cultural differences, perhaps even cultural differences. Another board member cut in sharply. She told the woman to use the service entrance. There's no spin in the world that makes that sound like charity. A silence fell. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Do I need to remind this board who built this empire? Who secured Zhang Wei's interest in the first place? Except you didn't, the first director said quietly. Zhang Wei is meeting with Elena Liu tomorrow, privately. The words dropped like a stone in a well. Victoria's chest tightened. What? He requested her contact. Said he preferred to discuss cultural projects with her rather than through Thornfield intermediaries. We couldn't refuse. For the first time in years, Victoria felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. The empire she had always believed unshakable was showing cracks. And those cracks had a name, Elena Liu. By Thursday, the story evolved. It was no longer just about the gala. An investigative blog published documents from a whistleblower inside Thornfield Enterprises. They detailed discriminatory hiring practices. Executive leadership was 93% white, 87% male. Women of color rarely advanced past assistant roles. Diversity training had been performed only once in the last decade, and only to secure a government contract. Worse still, old lawsuits resurfaced, quietly settled claims from former staff alleging harassment, wrongful termination, and systemic racism. Cases Victoria had believed buried were now unearthed, stitched together into a damning narrative. Every headline carried her name. Every photo showed her at her cruelest angle, emerald necklace flashing like a weapon. By Friday, the donors began to flee. The Thornfield Foundation's biggest backer, the Rosenfeld Family Trust, issued a statement. We are suspending all contributions pending further review of recent events. Soon after, another sponsor pulled out. Then another calls went unanswered. Emails came back curt and legalistic. Victoria's calendar, once packed with invitations and dinners, began to hollow out. At night, she sat alone in her penthouse, staring at the emerald necklace lying on her vanity. It no longer looked like power. It looked like evidence. Through it all, Elena Liu said nothing. She returned to work at the hotel, quietly slipping through back hallways, avoiding reporters camped outside. She gave no interviews, released no statements, and that silence became its own kind of power. The media painted her as dignified, refusing to exploit her humiliation for attention. Her silence forced others to speak on her behalf, colleagues, union leaders, professors who remembered her brilliance, neighbors who admired her humility. In every story, she shone brighter simply by saying nothing at all. By Saturday night, Victoria was desperate. She summoned her PR team, demanded strategies, threatened firings. "We'll launch a campaign," she declared. "Highlight my philanthropy, my work in underprivileged neighborhoods. Except those neighborhoods know you as the woman who gentrified them." Her head of PR interrupted softly. "You've evicted hundreds. Any campaign will backfire." "Then buy her silence," Victoria snapped. "How much does she want? 100,000? $1 million? Her PR head shook his head. "She hasn't asked for a cent. She hasn't asked for anything." "That's why they trust her." Victoria's voice cracked into a whisper. "Then what does she want?" The PR head hesitated. "Nothing. And that's the most dangerous answer of all." By Sunday, the storm had become a hurricane. The New York Times ran a Sunday feature. The Fall of Emerald Power, How One Comment Shattered the Thornfield Empire. The article was merciless. It charted Victoria's rise, her cruelty, her disregard for those beneath her. It contrasted her empire's billions with Elena Liu's modest one-bedroom apartment in Queens. It painted a picture not of misunderstanding, but of systemic rot exposed by a single spark. The last paragraph was the death blow. In the end, perhaps the service entrance was more than a door. Perhaps it was a mirror, reflecting a truth Victoria Thornfield Hayes could no longer hide. Victoria threw the newspaper across her penthouse floor. The silence that followed was crushing. For the first time in her life, she felt something she had never allowed herself to feel, the inevitability of collapse. Sunday should have been a day of quiet, of brunches in private clubs and long afternoons of curated leisure. For Victoria Thornfield Hayes, it was nothing short of a siege. Her penthouse became a fortress under siege by cameras. Paparazzi clustered at the building entrance, reporters swarmed the sidewalks, and even drones buzzed above the rooftop pool. The service elevator, the one she had once insisted workers use to avoid contaminating her lobby, was now her only way in and out. Irony stung like acid. Inside, the walls seemed to close in. Newspapers screamed her downfall. Social media timelines overflowed with memes of her emerald necklace photoshopped into shackles, captions branding her the Emerald Tyrant. She hadn't eaten since Friday. Coffee and champagne fueled her, but even that turned sour in her mouth. Every phone call was another piece of bad news. Monday morning, she arrived at Thornfield Tower expecting loyalty. Instead, she walked into a silent boardroom. The long oak table, once her throne, now felt hostile. Board members sat stiffly, papers stacked neatly in front of them like shields. "Victoria," began Charles Rosenfeld, the chairman, his voice soft but steady. "We need to discuss the future." Her eyes narrowed. "The future is Thornfield. I am Thornfield." Charles didn't flinch. "And Thornfield is hemorrhaging. Stock dropped 14% overnight. Investors are withdrawing. 3 international partners froze negotiations. We cannot afford—" She slammed her hand on the table. "Do not speak to me about affordability. Without me, there is no Thornfield. You think donors gave millions because of spreadsheets? They gave because I dazzled them, because I made them believe. Once," Charles said quietly. "Not anymore." The words hung in the air like a guillotine. By Tuesday, her foundation was a skeleton. The Thornfield Foundation's grand gala calendar was wiped clean, sponsorships canceled one after another. Banks quietly froze accounts, citing compliance reviews. Trusted friends refused to answer her calls. Even her beloved opera circle, the women she had once ruled with jeweled whispers, had dissolved into silence. The final betrayal came from Evelyn Crawford, her oldest ally, who issued a statement. "The Thornfield Foundation's values no longer align with our vision of progress and inclusion. We regret to announce the end of our partnership." Victoria read it 3 times, each word slicing deeper. Evelyn had been at her side for 20 years. If Evelyn could abandon her, then anyone could. What destroyed her wasn't just the elite walking away. It was the staff, the ones she had dismissed as invisible. Suddenly finding voices, one by one, they spoke. A driver recounted being ordered to park blocks away in the pouring rain because Victoria didn't want an old sedan near her Bentley. A maid described how Victoria once demanded she scrub the marble floor again because she saw a shadow in the polish. A former assistant shared voice recordings of Victoria, berating her in shrill, cutting tones. "You are replaceable. Don't forget that." Each story lit the fire higher. Each testimony stripped away another layer of glamour until all that remained was cruelty, laid bare for the world to dissect. Meanwhile, Elena Liu's silence became luminous. When asked for comment, she only smiled politely and declined. When cameras chased her down hallways, she bowed her head and kept walking. She never raised her voice, never sought attention. This quiet grace only amplified her presence. She became a symbol without asking for it, the embodiment of dignity in the face of arrogance. Journalists began calling her the Quiet Storm. Philanthropists reached out, offering support for her studies. Jiang Wei himself invited her to his foundation headquarters, honoring her as a cultural bridge, where Victoria was noise and collapse. Elena was silence and assent. By midweek, the humiliation reached its peak. Needing liquidity to cover debts and mounting legal bills, Victoria authorized the auction of her prized emerald necklace. Sotheby's announced it with relish. The Thornfield Emerald, a jewel of power now for sale. The auction was broadcast live. Cameras captured the necklace gleaming under harsh lights, once a symbol of untouchable wealth, now a trophy of downfall. The final insult came when an anonymous buyer secured it for less than half its estimated value. Rumors swirled that the buyer was a women's rights coalition, planning to display it in a museum as an artifact of arrogance. Victoria watched the auction from her penthouse, glass of wine trembling in her hand. She couldn't finish the broadcast. The sight of strangers bidding on her power was too much. Thursday brought the lawyers. Former staff filed suits, emboldened by the climate. 3 women claimed racial discrimination. 2 others alleged verbal abuse so severe it led to psychological breakdowns. A wrongful termination suit gained traction, threatening to expose internal Thornfield documents. Every headline grew sharper. Empire of abuse. The Emerald Tyrant faces reckoning. From gala to courtroom. Her legal team advised settlements. She refused. Pride, she insisted, would not allow her to kneel. But pride was expensive. Each refusal cost millions in fees. Her accounts, once overflowing, now drained like punctured veins. By Friday, she was alone. Her daughter refused her calls, embarrassed at school, Her husband, long more business partner than lover, left for Europe, citing privacy concerns. Even her personal assistant quit, leaving a curt note. "I cannot stand by this any longer." The penthouse echoed with emptiness. Rooms that once hosted lavish soirees now felt like mausoleums. The mirrors seemed crueler, reflecting not the glamorous queen but the desperate woman beneath. She drank too much. Slept too little. Her emerald green gowns hung unworn, mocking her from their velvet covers, and always the whispers of that night returned. "You don't belong here, sweetheart." "The service entrance is around back," the words replayed in her head, now not as dominance but as doom, Saturday evening. The networks aired an exclusive interview, not with Victoria, but with Elena. She sat in a modest chair, plain blouse, no makeup but confidence shining in her eyes. The interviewer pressed her, tried to lure her into condemnation, but Elena never raised her voice. "I don't wish harm on anyone," she said simply. "But dignity should not depend on your paycheck. No one deserves to be told they belong in the shadows." Those words cut sharper than any accusation. They echoed across households, screens, and headlines. In that moment, the contrast was undeniable. Elena's quiet humanity versus Victoria's loud cruelty. The public had chosen their symbol, and it wasn't Victoria. By Sunday night, 1 week after the gala, Victoria sat alone at her dining table, staring at unopened mail. Final notices, legal summons, termination letters. Her phone lay silent. The woman who once commanded a city couldn't summon a single friend. The emerald necklace was gone. The foundation was gone. The board was circling like vultures. And Victoria Thornfield Hayes, once the queen of Manhattan society, realized the unthinkable. She was no longer feared. She was pitied. The collapse had begun, and there was no stopping it now. Monday morning arrived, not with sunlight, but with the sharp knock of a court officer. Victoria opened her penthouse door to find a man in a navy jacket holding an envelope. "Victoria Thornfield Hayes?" She forced a brittle smile. "Obviously," he handed her the papers. "You've been served." The door closed with a heavy click, leaving her clutching the envelope. Her manicured hands trembled as she tore it open. Class action complaint, racial discrimination, workplace harassment, unlawful termination. Plaintiffs, 12 former Thornfield employees. It wasn't one lawsuit. It was an army. The courtroom became her new stage, but this time she was not the star. She was the accused. Reporters packed the benches. Cameras waited outside, flashes exploding with every glimpse of emerald silk. Victoria refused to abandon her brand, arriving each day in jewels and gowns, as if wealth itself could still command reverence. But in the eyes of the court, she was small. The plaintiffs testified one by one. Marisol Alvarez, a cleaner, described being called unpresentable because of her accent. David Chen, a junior analyst, recounted being denied promotions despite outperforming peers. Fatima Rahman, a former assistant, played recordings of Victoria screaming, "You people are lucky to be here at all." Each testimony chipped away at the marble facade she had built around herself. Each story painted the same picture. A woman who built her empire not just on money but on cruelty. The trial was televised. America watched. Day after day, networks replayed the testimonies, side by side with clips of Victoria's lavish parties. Commentators asked if she was the embodiment of systemic prejudice in high society. Editorials dubbed her the last socialite, a relic of a crueler age. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered daily. Some held signs that read, "Service entrance no more. Dignity has no price." Elena stood silent. "We speak loud." The chants echoed through the marble halls as Victoria entered each morning. Emerald heels clicking against the floor. She pretended not to hear, but every word lodged like a thorn. Midway through the proceedings, the judge called an unexpected witness. "Elena Liu, please take the stand." The courtroom shifted. Cameras leaned in. Even Victoria's heart skipped. Elena rose from the gallery, dressed simply in a dark suit, hair tied back, no jewelry but the quiet strength in her posture. She walked past Victoria without a glance and sat before the court. The lawyer asked, "Miss Liu, can you tell us about the night of the Thornfield Foundation Gala?" Elena's voice was calm, steady. "I was working as a translator that evening. When Mrs. Hayes approached me, she said, 'You don't belong here, sweetheart. The service entrance is around back.'" The words, now infamous, echoed through the courtroom. Silence followed. Elena continued, "I did not reply. There was nothing I could say that would change her mind about who she believed I was. But I want the court to know this. Belonging is not about money. It is not about necklaces or invitations. It is about dignity, and that belongs to everyone." Her words hung in the air like truth itself. Even the judge seemed momentarily struck. Victoria, for the first time, lowered her gaze. Cross-examination followed, but Elena never faltered. She remained composed, never raising her voice, never seeking vengeance. Her calm was Victoria's undoing. When it was her turn to testify, Victoria erupted. She raged about her philanthropy, her tireless work for society, the ingratitude of those who had benefited from her largesse. The jury watched, unimpressed. Her voice cracked into shrillness. Her emerald necklace, worn defiantly in court, looked less like power and more like chains. Though the legal trial was ongoing, the trial of public opinion had already ended. Corporations stripped her from boards. Fashion houses rescinded endorsements. Charities returned her donations, some publicly auctioning them to fund diversity initiatives. One particularly brutal headline in The Atlantic read, "Victoria Hayes, from patron to pariah." Weeks later, the court adjourned for the day, but Elena lingered in the hallway. Victoria, exhausted, found herself standing just a few feet away from her. For a moment, the noise of cameras and reporters faded. It was just the two of them. Victoria opened her mouth, searching for words, an apology, an excuse, something. But Elena only looked at her, eyes steady, calm, unyielding. Then she said softly, "You told me I didn't belong. But maybe it was you who never did." And with that, Elena walked away. Victoria stood frozen, emeralds heavy around her throat. The words sinking deeper than any verdict. The trial dragged on for months. But the outcome was inevitable. Settlements, fines, forced divestments. Victoria lost her board seat, her foundation, her influence. But the true reckoning wasn't legal or financial. It was personal. For the first time in her life, people no longer looked at her with awe or fear. They looked at her with pity, with contempt, with indifference. The Queen of Emeralds had become invisible, and that invisibility, the fate she had once tried to force on others, was her ultimate sentence. Months had passed since the trial. Ended, the Thornfield penthouse. Once the stage of glittering soirees was now half empty. Paintings were gone, sold at auction to cover settlements. The wine cellar had been emptied, vintage bottles uncorked by strangers at charity events, celebrating justice served. Even the grand piano, which had never been played, had been carted away. Victoria Thornfield Hayes sat at her dining table, a single lamp illuminating the darkened room. She wore no emeralds now, no makeup. Her once glossy hair hung limp against her shoulders. She checked her phone. No messages, no invitations, no calls. Silence, once her luxury, was now her prison. She thought of the service entrance she had once mocked others for using. Now, when she slipped out of the building to avoid cameras, it was the only door she used. The public moved on, but they did not forget. The memes faded, the hashtags slowed. But the story had entered the cultural bloodstream. Textbooks on business ethics began including the Thornfield collapse as a case study. Documentaries aired, dissecting her fall with surgical precision. In museums, the emerald necklace, bought by a women's coalition, sat in a glass case with a plaque, the Thornfield Emerald. Once a symbol of wealth, now a reminder of dignity denied. Tourists took photos. Students wrote essays. Her name, once synonymous with charity galas and high society, was now synonymous with arrogance and downfall. Elena Liu never sought fame, yet it found her anyway. After her testimony, universities offered her fellowships. She completed her master's degree in linguistics on a scholarship funded by a coalition of donors who admired her grace. Invitations poured in from conferences, cultural forums, and non-profit boards, but Elena remained humble. She still lived simply, still commuted by subway, still greeted her neighbors with a soft smile. When asked about Victoria, she never spoke ill. "I don't need to," she said in one interview. "The story speaks for itself. My focus is the future." Her future indeed was radiant. She founded a small institute dedicated to language access for immigrant communities, ensuring no one would be silenced by barriers of culture or tongue. Her name came to represent resilience, dignity, and justice quietly achieved. Victoria's exile was not physical but social. She still had money, though much diminished, and she still had her penthouse. But money could no longer buy what she craved most: relevance. Invitations no longer came. Friends no longer called. Even old enemies stopped mentioning her. Obscurity was sharper than enmity. She tried to re-enter society once, appearing at a minor charity luncheon in uptown Manhattan. The room fell silent when she arrived. Conversation stilled. Some guests turned their backs. Others simply stared. Within minutes, she excused herself, leaving her untouched champagne behind. It was then she realized she had not just fallen. She had been erased. The scandal left ripples far beyond the Thornfield name. Corporations launched internal reviews of their hiring practices. Hotels instituted new training on worker dignity. Donors began scrutinizing where their money flowed. At the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, a bronze plaque was installed in the staff entrance hallway. It read, "To those who keep the lights glowing, the floors shining, and the halls alive, you belong." Workers touched it as they passed. A quiet affirmation that the days of silence were ending. One spring afternoon, a year after the trial, fate arranged one final meeting. Victoria was walking through Central Park, her hair tucked under a scarf, sunglasses shielding her from recognition. She sat on a bench staring at the lake when she heard a familiar voice. "Elena?" She turned. There she was, Elena Liu, carrying a folder of papers, her posture upright, her face serene. For a moment, time froze. Victoria opened her mouth. Words failed her. No rehearsed apology could undo years of arrogance. No excuses would matter. Elena simply looked at her, eyes calm, unreadable. Then she gave a small nod. Not forgiveness, not friendship, but acknowledgement. A silent closing of the chapter. And she walked on. Victoria remained on the bench, the sound of footsteps fading into spring air, knowing she had just witnessed the final act of her relevance. Years later, the Thornfield scandal was still remembered, not as the story of a fallen heiress, but as a turning point. As the moment a cleaner's daughter, a student, a translator, stood taller in silence than an empire of emeralds. Victoria's legacy was a cautionary tale. Elena's legacy was hope, and the service entrance, it no longer meant shadows or shame. It meant a door to change.